Torque. Good pacing is all about using your energy when it benefits you the most. And most commonly when you're cycling and time trialing, you're trying to do this by pushing a little bit more power on the uphills and a little bit less on the downhills, or getting up to speed out of corners, or pushing more power into a headwind than you would with a tailwind. And this is beneficial with one really big caveat: creating too much torque. For our purposes, torque is basically the relationship between power and cadence. As you create more power and keep your cadence the same, torque is going to go up. And if you create the same amount of power but your cadence drops, torque goes up. But what we're really trying to look at and talk about and eliminate is when your cadence drops and your power goes up, because that causes a tremendous spike in torque. Take small punchy hills, for example. And we've all been there and done this. We go into a hill and we're too lazy to shift down a gear, so we just kind of stand up and mash our pedals to get over this short hill. Well, when you spike your torque like that, you are burning a lot of muscle glycogen. And saving your muscle glycogen and dosing it out more evenly over the course of an event is really, really important. It's a really, really important determiner of how well you're going to do at that event. Same thing applies for coming out of corners. We slow down, go into a 90-degree corner, start to pedal again, and realize we didn't shift, and now you're mashing a cadence of 50 or 60 for a few seconds. Again, this doesn't seem like much, but when you add it up dozens of times over the course of an hour or 2 hours or more, you're burning a lot of matches. All right, so let's talk about how to go about finding places in your rides or in your races where you were creating too much torque. So we're gonna go into Training Peaks together and find an old race file and look through it for places of higher torque. Here we go. This is a power file from 70.3 Santa Cruz. So you're just gonna open it up. I like to get this screen as big as we possibly can. And then we're looking for two things, the two things we talked about earlier: power and cadence. So I'm going to go ahead and hide everything but power and cadence. And so what we're trying to look at, we'll split this up into smaller segments. I usually like to go about 20 minutes at a time. We're looking for places where the cadence falls and yet the power goes up, and or power spikes where the cadence stays the same. All looks pretty good. This is a power spike, which could be necessary for the course, but the cadence stays high with it. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. The first place I notice is right here, where we get to 300 and almost 330 watts and a cadence below 80. And this athlete's FTP, or this athlete, is trying to pace out this entire ride at about 250 watts. So he's way up over target values and had his cadence drop. So we would want to pull that out and talk to the athlete about what went on there. And here's another pretty obvious spot where we've got power up to about 400, coinciding with a drop in cadence. Saying like, well, we could have saved some matches if we had shifted gears here as our power was going to spike, or better yet, limit the power spiking, right? But sometimes you just can't do that. So one way you can ride further and faster is to just be aware of what you're doing, how you're producing power, and if your cadence is dropping while you're doing that. So the next time you're coming into a hill or coming out of a corner, be more aware of what gear you're in and downshift and keep that cadence high. But of course, the demands of some events are going to require that you spike your torque repeatedly throughout the event. If you're doing a cycling race and trying to stay in a pack, you're going to be forced to do that. So let's talk about what you can do in training to prepare yourself. The number one thing you can do is recognize that riding the indoor trainer, although great for increasing fitness if used properly, does not do a great job of simulating high torque unless you're forcing it to do so. For example, the erg mode on a smart trainer allows you to pedal at any RPMs, and the trainer will create the proper amount of power for you. So you upload a workout, you've got 5 minutes at X watts. No matter how fast you pedal, you're going to be producing the same amount of watts. And that's great for zoning out and getting work done. But the problem is it won't let you increase torque if you want to. So if you're preparing for an event that is going to require jumps in power and thus jumps in torque, you need to set up your training and specifically your indoor training to simulate that by taking it off erg mode and throwing in some high power spikes even in your steadier state intervals. You can check out this example of a training session that, although still primarily focused on threshold and threshold work, tosses in a bit of higher torque efforts to help you simulate what you're going to be going through on race day or in your group rides. If you haven't been doing work like this and you find yourself losing ground or becoming more fatigued as the ride goes on, throw some of these into your steady state intervals to get adaptations that more closely match what you're trying to do in the real world.